Good evening and welcome to STARFest, the St. Albert Greeters Festival. I'm Peter Midgley, the festival director, and on behalf of STARFest, thank you for joining us. Before we introduce our guests for the evening, I do want to acknowledge yet again, we are broadcasting from Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. You can buy the books tonight, both those of Nazanine Hozar and of Marcello de Cintio, at both of Edmonton's independent bookstores, Glass Books, Bookshop, and Audrey's Books. The links have been posted in the description under the YouTube video, so please click on the links, buy the books. After our introductions, our guests will speak for roughly 40 minutes. During that time, I do encourage you to please post your comments in the comments section and also your questions. We will gather them and relay them to the guests at the end of the evening. If you are on YouTube, remember you do have to be logged in order to make a comment. Now, tonight's guests. Marcello de Cintio, our interviewer, is the author of 4 books, including Walls, Travels Along the Barricades, which won the 2013 Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing, and of Pay No Heed to the Rockets, Palestine in the Present Tense, winner of the W.O. Mitchell City of Calgary Book Prize. Marcello's next book, which is about the secret lives of taxi drivers, will be appearing in spring 2021. And tonight's star, Nazanine Hozar, was born in Tehran shortly before the revolution that deposed the Shah of Iran. A year after her birth, Iraq invaded Iran, and that led to the 7 or 8 year war. Hozar came to Canada with her mother at the age of 7, and they settled in BC. Aria, her novel, was named a finalist for the 2020 Amazon First Novel Award. Marcello and Nazanine, welcome to STARFest. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Nazanine, it was such a lovely opportunity to sit with you remotely and talk about this beautiful book. I want to congratulate you again on Aria. It's really a fantastic novel.
Thanks, Marcello. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks.
Before we start talking about it, I want to ask about what you've been up to in the last few months, pandemic-wise. How has the pandemic been treating you from a writer and reader perspective? Like how are things been? I know there's some people that have been super busy and other people have been unable to get anything done. Where are you on that spectrum?
Well, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. The past month or so has been a bit tricky. I started out with the pandemic a bit unable to do anything as I was riddled with anxiety and um, kind of overwhelmed by the lockdown that we initially went through. And then I sort of got myself together as things opened up a bit, and I started really working very heavily on my next novel, and was working through that quite diligently until recently. Until recently, I've kind of been going through some things, and I had to stop for a while. I moved and had some family tragedy recently, but it really has been a struggle. I mean, I can't seem to get my head into too many into a literary headspace. I'm so overwhelmed by anxiety all the time. I am a bit of a history buff, so I've been watching a lot of history documentaries, as I always do. I'm sort of obsessed with sort of Anglo-Saxon and medieval England. And I seem to watch a lot of history documentaries about them. But other than that, I'm just like you said, we were talking earlier. Let's watch superhero movies, sort of try to enter a world that is pure fantasy to just escape this unfortunate circumstance that we all seem to find ourselves in, and not deal with anything that is too harsh and too realistic. That's sort of where I've been for the past several months. I don't know how about you. You've been in the same boat?
Same boat. It's been tough to, whatever kind of creative nutrition I require, I'm not getting it. You know what I mean? And it is the anxiety that's kind of pulling that out. And yeah, I'd rather do anything than be creative these
Yeah.
days. Yeah, I feel you're showing off watching historical documentaries.
Yeah, I'm not. That it soothes me. I'm not showing off. It's for some reason they soothe me. So yeah.
Well, let's go from the fantasy world to the reality that your book talks about. It's it's a cliche to describe a novel and say that the setting is another character in the book, but certainly Tehran does kind of loom as a character in this book, both kind of physically and certainly like metaphorically. And this is your hometown. And before we talk about the Tehran of the novel, I'd like to hear about Tehran of that you know.
Mhm.
Tell me about your birth town, your hometown.
Well, the Tehran that I know is very different from the Tehran in the novel, and very different from the Tehran of today. So my memories of Tehran are one in which there was quite a lot of turmoil and unfortunately a lot of state control, but as well still a very sort of metropolitan, cosmopolitan city, very big city, a lot going on in it, very lively, and a place where um, there was always connections, family connections, human connections, very warm,
Hmm.
despite its very city-like atmosphere. I just recall, and again, a very almost, I want to say almost warlike atmosphere. There was still a lot of warmth and family, almost familial, generated camaraderie happening throughout Tehran, throughout the everywhere there. Um, and I have a strong connection to it that way. Now that
Hmm.
Tehran is very different from the Tehran in the novel and the Tehran of today. I think the Tehran of today is much more peaceful
Hmm.
and isn't as engulfed in the turmoil as the Tehran that I remember.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so the Tehran that is happening today is much more peaceful, I think. Less, I mean, still obviously with its political problems, but not the Tehran that I remember. Certainly not as filled with tension and fear,
Hmm.
because there was also a lot of fear in the Tehran that I remember. Obviously, there was a war with Iraq going on at the time, and unfortunately, that occupies a lot of my headspace. Those memories of the Tehran that I was born into.
Hmm. And that's not the Tehran of the novel, though, right? I was just going to say that, yes, the Tehran of the novel is not the Tehran, is not during the Iran-Iraq war. I'm which is the Tehran that you remember as a child. What
Right.
Why did you choose a Tehran that you know less as the time and setting for Aria? I'm curious.
Well, it was a very out of creative curiosity, really.
Uh,
I mean, I'm sort of telling the story of the time before the Iranian Revolution and before the Iran of today, sort of leading up to the revolution, and it's sort of looking at what led to the revolution. And so then I've got to situate my characters into that city, into that
mhm.
world. And so I've got to explore Tehran in that time. And so it became a creative exercise for me to research it, to understand it, to get to know that world that I really know nothing about, that I really
Mhm.
only through stories of people kind of explaining Tehran to me, through literature that I've read, get to know that Tehran. Um, so that's why I kind of decided to explore that Tehran
Yeah,
in that way, the Tehran before my own time.
it's interesting. I think maybe if there's one thing that remains the same between your childhood Tehran and even maybe contemporary Tehran is the line between north and south, and the north and south of the city, and
That's right.
that's a running that kind of almost frames the book.
Would you like me to comment on?
I would like,
North
yeah,
and
please
South?
tell us about the north and south dichotomy in the city.
Throughout, in either the previous time and the present.
Yeah, I just
Correct?
wanted to kind of just describe for those
Well, I
who
can
don't know much
talk
about
about
Iran.
that a
Yeah.
bit. Um, the that's something that hasn't changed in Tehran, even in modern times, is that there is a vast difference between the north and south of Tehran. The northern area of Tehran is very, to this day, very wealthy, very affluent, sort of more educated upper classes. And the southern part of Tehran, in the past and today, continues to be primarily impoverished, and filled with much more religious classes of people. And as you drive up between north and south, you can see this major difference between these two groups of people. And I wanted that to be in the novel very succinct and very visible, um, to show the difference in classes and difference in systems and society in Tehran, to show the different class structures of the Iranian people as well.
You did such a marvelous job of that, just with
If
the
you can hear me, the different north and south between Iran and in Tehran, the difference in north and south. Did that come
yes,
through?
yes, it came through, and I
Okay.
wanted to say that how what a marvelous job you did of that. Just the details when your characters pass from north and south and back again, like just the way the streetscape changes. You know, it's when you're describing it, it's not like some grand economic system. It's what is on the street corners that changes. It's such an intimate and remarkable way to do it.
Exactly, exactly. And you see it too when you're traveling in Tehran. I don't know if in your travels you managed to notice that, but it
Mhm.
does change so very subtly as you're going through that street, that main street, which is now called Valias Street. At the time,
Mhm.
it was called Pahlavi Street. And it's this subtle changes that occur as you're going along these 19, 20 kilometers.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah.
Now, you spoke a little bit earlier about how you wanted to to talk about the time, kind of the pre-revolution Iran. Um, but what I found so interesting about the book was how this is not this is a book about people and about a family and about young people, like children, and not a book about revolution, right? There's
That's
politics
right.
there. There's politics that, just like the city itself, kind of hums in the background. Um, but I don't feel like this book is taking a particular political stance. Nor is it filled with politics. It's all about mostly about these young people, especially your title character. Can you talk a bit about that, kind of the politics as kind of background hum?
Yeah, absolutely. It was very important to me that it not be taking too much of a political stance, that it just be presenting people's lives. And it just so happens that, as with all of us in our daily lives, politics just manages somehow to shape our lives, somehow mold our lives. It's very much in the background of things.
Mhm.
And in this case with the Iranians, very much, maybe more, perhaps more so than most people. But really, in the end, it's really about the daily lives of these young people and some of the older people surrounding them,
Right.
without turning into sort of a textbook, sort of preaching on political positions or political stances, and
Yeah.
making judgments on things. that it's really taking a very taking a step back and looking at everything from a very objective point of view, and trying to understand that these people are sort of molded by the sort of powers that are beyond their control, and these powers are very much in the distance. They're um, decisions by other people and circumstances so far from them that are taking place very much in the background of their lives, that are then shaping their lives, but not up front and center of their lives. The
Right.
front and center of their lives are their daily problems of their daily lives that are very much based in the sort of cradles of their own families.
Yes, yes.
And that's very much like our own lives in our everyday situations, much more than any kind of political thing that is happening around us. That's always the sort of the B story, the B line, the politics, or
Hmm.
even the C
Hmm.
line story. And
Yeah, you're
yeah,
not telling you're not hanging a story onto a historical event.
that's right.
You're telling the story of these family and these amazing characters where something's happening in the background.
That's right. And it just so happens that Iran is somehow a political figure on the world political landscape, and something very big is happening during the time that these people are alive, and it's affecting them more than anything, but it's not the major focus of their lives. It eventually does have an impact, but
Hmm.
um, the things that matter to them are the things that matter to all of us, anywhere in the world: love, intimacy, vulnerability, um, their death, their the daily goings on of life that we try to sort of cling to
Hmm.
ourselves, anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to necessarily take place in Iran. It could take place anywhere: Canada, Europe, anywhere, anywhere in Africa, anywhere in the world. You could find these humans, universal stories. Yeah,
What there was something else that kind of seemed to run all the way through the book is that all these characters, I can't wait to talk about Aria as a character because she's one of the my favorite characters I've read in fiction in a long, long time. Um, but what they all have in common is this kind of this constant rebellion. No one in the book does what they're supposed to do.
yeah,
They're rebelling against, and but they're not rebelling against a villain. We'll get to Zara in a second, but for the most
that's
part,
right.
it's these kind of faceless authorities that they're rebelling against. It's tradition or class or faith. You know what I mean? There's not
That's right.
there's not some sort of mustache twirling villain in it. It's these kind of underlying concepts that everyone is disobeying.
That's right. And I think because the story is taking place at a real turning point in Iranian history, and not only Iranian history, I think in history. I mean, it's taking place during the 60s, where very much there's sort of the questioning of sort of norms of women's place in the world, feminism, of the place of religion in the world, of the concepts of democracy. And this, I have a scene where I show the moon landing, so even
Hmm.
the notions of science are being questioned, of what human beings are really capable of. So a lot of these ideas that have been very old-fashioned and entrenched in society, in many societies, are really coming into question, and the youth is really sort of bringing that to the fore and sort of pushing against it. And I think that that comes out in the decisions that many of the characters make, even the older characters, because they too are being
Hmm.
confronted by these sort of vast sweeping changes in society,
Hmm.
making decisions. For example, one of the characters, Ferishte, who makes a decision to bring an orphan sort of girl into her home, who's sort of considered a bastard. I mean, considering the class she comes from, to bring child like that into her home would have, in her class of family, would be considered sort of unacceptable, but she is
Hmm.
pushing against that norm that she's raised with and
Hmm.
does it. And so everybody is constantly making decisions to go against the traditional customs that they've been brought up with.
Hmm.
These tiny decisions kind of set off little ripples throughout the novel, and
Hmm.
in the end they sort of culminate into sort of what we see as the grand sort of ending of the whole thing, this sort of inevitability that ends up at the very end of the whole thing, which kind of there collides with the true part of the novel, which is the historical part, which is the revolution and so on.
Hmm.
Um,
I
but
gotta say
yeah, but every
about this. So go ahead.
no, I'm just saying that it is very much a novel that's full of characters who no longer are willing to play by the rules. That
Hmm.
everybody's wanting to kind of carve their own path. Almost everyone in the novel is wanting to carve their own path and not
Yeah.
play by the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah. And chief among them for the reader, I think, and certainly the top of in our hearts is Aria, is your title character.
That's
And
right.
like I said, I defy anyone to read this book and not absolutely be enamored by this girl. Like, and you've created this marvelous, fierce, sarcastic, smart. Yeah, she's wonderful. Who like as her author? Tell me,
Yeah.
do you know Aria's? Like, where did Aria come from?
Well, she's to be honest, I had a bit of a tricky time getting her on paper. She
Really?
wasn't easy to write. She was one of the harder characters to write. I had to make her um, this very sarcastic and sort of defiant character, but also very like sort of the hero of the novel. So she had to have a likability, but also be very a bit tough. There are moments of her in her that she might do things that are not very likable,
Yeah, sure.
that um, where she makes decisions where you might question her choices. And what she is she's actually, I think, a combination of several of the women that I've known throughout my life.
Interesting.
Um, and she's a sort of a conglomerate of these women that I've sort of brought in together. And I know of various Iranian women who have this kind of very tough, snappy personality.
Yeah.
This is a trait you find in a lot of Iranian women. And I wanted her to have this very tough, snappy personality where she's ready to talk back to anyone who speaks up to her, and is always ready with a word, always ready
Hmm.
with a answer for anything. And uh, but I also wanted her to make her very sensitive at the same time,
Hmm.
to delve into her heart, and not make her just sarcastic and just sort of there with a quick word. So it was a very
Yeah.
delicate balance to get her right on paper.
Oh, you've done such a great job, and snappy
Hello?
is the perfect adjective for her. Likable characters that I've read in a long time. Zara has to be one of the worst. Uh, um, there's a,
Right.
there's a um, there's a scene in early in the book. I'm not giving anything away. Where Zara forces a young Aria who's blind at the time and has like a bloody bandage over her eyes to chop onions, and then she leaves the house and leaving this little girl with a sharp knife in her hand cutting onions blind. And I can't remember anything as cruel that I've read. The last time I read something as cruel as this particular scene in the book. Yes, Zara is quite the kind of the wicked stepmother, for sure.
Right.
Um, and yet throughout the book, Arya's always is always almost like seeking Zara's, if not affection, but attention. Right? Throughout the novel, she's always inquiring if Zara's been asking about her. Is Zara going to come visit me? Can you tell me a little bit about creating Zara and what Aria needs from her?
Yes, I mean, one of the things I mean, this is trying to sort of get into the headspace of a mother who is completely unfit to be a mother,
Right.
and also who's very wounded herself, as we find out through the book, through her own trauma that she's been through. Not that that excuses her behavior, but um, it does explain maybe a little bit why she is the way she is, and it it also in Iran, sometimes when a child is sort of found on the street like that, she's not very thought of in very high,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the past. Things have changed obviously in recent times, but in the past she's sort of looked down on, and um, this is how it results in Zara's eyes of how she sees this little girl.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of Arya wanting to gain some kind of affection from Zara and always looking and checking in on her and wondering if Zara is thinking of her, the way I sort of explain that is that this is the first mother figure that Arya ever
Mm-hmm.
remembers having. And um, it's, despite all the abuse, it is still some kind of semblance of a mother that she's ever had up until
Mm-hmm.
later on in her life. And so there will always be a need to have some kind of mother-daughter relationship. There will always be some kind of yearning for that, I think, psychologically, despite the
Mm-hmm.
trauma, despite the abuse. And so somewhere in her mind, somewhere deep down, she's constantly hoping that perhaps Zara will change, that Zara will
Mm-hmm.
um, flip and have some emotion, have some love, have some kindness and caring, that deep down there will be something, always that sort of hope somewhere deep down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of where that kind of psychology is coming from, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really just delving into the deeper psychology of Aria, of someone in her situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm very fascinated by these types of relationships in sort of in the human psyche of the very close relationships, mother, daughter, uh, daughter, father, son, father, and if there's cracks in them, and if there's trauma within them, and um, sort of how do people try to heal these broken bonds, and um, in what way does that come out in the psyche of a human being, and it's coming out in this way that despite all the abuse and the horrors that she's been put through, Arya is still searching for some kind of love, no matter what, because that's the ultimate thing that she's been searching for her whole life, and she'll probably forever be wanting that. Even
Mm-hmm.
years into the future, she'll be searching
Mm-hmm.
for something like that from
Mm-hmm.
Zara.
Naz, would you read a little bit for us?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, you mentioned an interesting part because I am going to read a little section here where Arya's sort of been sent to off to get some bread from a baker from a bakery, and she ends up actually stealing this bread. But as she's on the streets of Tehran, she uh, manages to see her father, who is Behruz, who's the man who sort of found her on the street when she was a baby, because she was left abandoned on the street by her real mother. And this is Arya noticing her father, and then thinking also about Zahra and what Zahra will think when Zahra finds out that she's stolen bread and been wandering the streets alone and not returned home in time to return the bread to her. So I'll read a section from that. Behind an old brick wall, a mile from the bakery, Arya took several bites before remembering she had better keep some for Zahra. Maybe the punishment wouldn't be as severe. As she was folding the bread like a paper boy folds newspapers, she heard footsteps. She saw a male figure approaching, appearing in and out of the shadows as he walked under the streetlights along the road. For a moment Aria felt scared, but something about the gait of the man, the way he moved, was familiar to her. When he finally stepped directly under a light, she caught her breath. It was her father. She wanted to shout, but a stronger instinct took hold and she ducked behind a car parked by the road. She watched as he took a deep drag from his cigarette, looked in both directions along the street, then crossed it. His footsteps were heavy, grinding gravel under the thick heels of his freshly waxed shoes. She remembered her father saying that the army had taught him three things: how to iron, how to polish, and how to swallow pain whole. Once he got to the other side of the street and was headed down the sidewalk, Aria followed him. She followed him the whole mile back to where she had started, near the bakery. Several times she wanted to call out to him so he could lift her and hold her and take her home, tell her a story, maybe the one about the lion and the lamb at Persepolis, or about the tree of orphans in heaven. And maybe they would share some bread and he would tell her she was a good girl for not listening to Zara because Zara was not good. And then maybe he would tell her that he was going to take her away to a land where there was only good, where there were no Zaras, only boys with dark necks who would climb peach and cherry trees with her. Maybe he would promise that she wasn't in trouble and that he would take care of her for the rest of his life. But she stayed away because maybe he was doing something she wasn't supposed to know about, and if he found out, she knew he would hate her like her real parents must have. She followed him down a sidewalk, through an alley, and across another road. There he stopped at a door and knocked 3 times. Someone opened the door and talked to them for a while, and he talked to them for a while. Then the door closed and Behruz moved on. He didn't stop at the neighboring home, but at one a couple of doors down. There the same thing happened. A door opened. There was just enough light from the street lamp to let Aria see it was a woman. The woman was old. She said something and it looked like she was pointing her finger down the road. Behruz turned his head and looked in that direction, nodding a few times. The door closed. Behruz moved down several more doors. On the other side of the road, hidden behind parked cars, Aria followed him. He stopped at another door, knocked. No one opened. He knocked again. Then a light turned on, but still no one opened the door. He moved on, knocking on door after door. Some opened, some did not. He turned to cross the street. Aria slid under a car so he wouldn't spot her. She could only see his shoes as they shuffled along the pavement. He was wearing his nice ones, and there was a gleam of light along their dark leather. Now, thinking about it, Aria realized her father was wearing his finest clothes, even a tie, something she hadn't known he possessed. She'd seen him in his uniform and sometimes the black trousers and white shirt he liked to wear on days off, but never a tie. She'd grown tired and imagined falling asleep there under the car. And no sooner had she thought this than she almost did. She kept her eyes open long enough to peek out and see a final door, open to Behruz, the door of the bakery she had stolen from earlier. She watched as the baker asked, "Can I help you?" To which Behruz replied, "Yes, I am looking for someone." And then she could no longer keep her eyes open. When she woke up to the roar of an engine, day was about to break. Behruz was long gone. She stumbled out from under the car to the horror of the driver, who exclaimed the names of Saint Fatima Zahra, the Prophet's daughter, the Saint Imam Reza, and Saint Imam Hussein. "You will be Satan's favorite child, you stupid girl," he said as he drove off in anger. Aria found she'd been clutching the bread all night. Hungry again, she tore off a piece with her teeth and chewed it all the way home. When Zahra saw her, she slapped her across the face with the back of her hand. Then she grabbed a twig from the cherry tree that she always kept handy and hit Aria's cheeks and neck. "You'd better hold tight to the rest of that bread, because it's the only food you'll be getting for a week," she shouted. Finally, Zahra sent her to the balcony again so that the neighbors could see what a demon she was. Aria spent the rest of the day huddled there until she fell asleep. When she awoke the next morning, she found a beaded bracelet placed beside her head. All the beads except 4 were white. The other 4 had letters painted on them, 4 alien images. If she'd been able to, she would have read her own name. There we go.
What a beautiful reading.
So
Thank you so much,
the reading
Naz.
there, Marcello.
Thank you so much for that. So yeah, so the question I had was before we started our online discussion, I rudely shushed you because you were talking
That's
about
okay.
how about language and how you're almost translating the book from Farsi, and I'm curious what you meant by that.
That's right. So when I was writing the book, all the dialogue and much of the narration was in my mind was happening in Farsi. So I
Huh.
was writing the dialogue that these people were having with each other in my head. It was in Farsi. They're speaking together in Farsi, and then when I would write it down, I would translate from Farsi into English. And a lot of the narration as well, my descriptions of the homes, my descriptions of how someone would walk through a street, for example, was happening in Farsi in my head, and then I would translate that into English on the page. So, um, so you were perhaps mentioning how there were some similarities between my style of writing and a Palestinian writer that you had read, and other people have told me about various other Middle Eastern writers that they find some similarities with in my writing, and I do think that there's something to that. That there's something in the perhaps the Middle Eastern sort of lexicon
Hmm.
going on, and the sounds and the music of that region perhaps coming through, um, and the sort of the poetry of those spaces coming in through the writing, because so much of it is done in Persian
Mm-hmm.
and then has been translated into English, and so much so that I had to sometimes be very careful where the sentences were inversed. So Farsi is very much like French, where sort of verbs and nouns are inversed in the other order, and I had to be careful to make sure they're in the proper order in English. So that's sort of what was going on, and indeed the dialogue was very much again in Persian, but again I had to be careful so that it would be comprehensible in English, because sometimes it was incomprehensible, the translation. People, you can't directly translate, you make a direct translation at times,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not quite understandable if you're doing that direct translation. So, but the musicality for sure is there.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, and that became so clear during your reading. Is that that's yeah. If it wasn't, yeah, it's evident on the page, but even more so hearing you speak it out loud. Yeah, there is that. There's the musicality of Farsi in your English, which is such
Yeah,
a delight to listen to.
yeah. So
On the craft end of that thing too, I wanted just to mention. You talked about how at the, and I'm not going to give anything away, but you talked about at the end of the book, everything kind of comes together, and falls apart. It's
yeah,
um,
yeah,
um, but I just wanted to point out like the craft of those final pages, like how the pace of everything just speeds up so much, which must be deliberate. And there's even there's that musicality of that too, where
yeah,
for lack of a better word, the tempo of the scenes, the scenes are shorter and faster, and we feel like
right,
we're on kind of runaway train near the end of it, heading to some sort of inevitable end. And
right,
it's really in the same way that the for me the onion scene kind of I had a physical reaction to it. So too
right,
did the end, and it's just because you were totally manipulating me as the author, and
yeah,
forcing me through this chaos. So that was marvelous. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that it was just marvelously done.
yeah. Thanks, thank you. Well, yeah, that was very, very deliberate to sort of reflect the revolutionary chaos that was happening in the streets, to sort of have that reflected on the page with one scene after another, sort of picking up the pace very quickly. in one long chapter. That revolution scene is just this one long chapter that goes
Yeah,
on.
it's amazing.
And yeah, there were discussions about that, about whether I should keep that like that, but
Oh,
at the
really?
end we decided to. Yeah, um, my editor and I were both in agreement that we should keep it, but there was just a moment about whether is this the right choice, and very quickly we decided that it was the right choice. It wasn't a very long discussion,
It's
but
good. I'm
it
glad.
did come up. I mean, I had to ask myself that a little while just to be sure that this was the right path to take.
All right.
The chop make it so fast and quick. Yeah.
Yeah. That was great.
Thank you, Marcello. Appreciate
No,
it.
no,
Thank
no.
you.
Thank you. Peter, did we wrap? Like, what now?
I think that's about it. Unless I did have one question here from Lindsay who asked, how did you pick the name Aria and why?
It's a good question.
Oh, the so the name Aria is not only the main character's name, but it also refers to the nationality of the Iranian people. So
Oh,
the Iranian people are the people of Aria, so they're known as the Aryan people. Not the Hitler bastardized version of Aryan, but the actual Aryan, which people from Iran and northern India are known as the Aryan people. And the people we call ourselves the people of Aria. So it has a double meaning, or a triple meaning actually,
Triple, eh?
because yeah, there's also the musical element of Aria, which is a song,
hmm.
sort of a lament. So it carries several meanings. So, but the main meaning that I wanted it is that it's a story of the Iranian people. So and it's the main character's name as well.
Well,
So that's where the the title comes from.
that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. My daughter's busy reading the book right now, and I will share that with
Ah,
her as well. She would be
thank you.
the three-way. And then there was a question here that you answered partly at the beginning about how Tehran had changed, but the other question was when last were you back? Part of that question was when last were you back?
Since I was a child, since
Hmm.
I came to Canada, I haven't gone back. Various sort of reasons, kind of a little bit worried, sort of political reasons that there might be some trouble if I go back. Right now with this book, there might be some trouble if I go back. We don't know. There's some uncertainty about it, but we'll wait and see, give it some time and see if um, there'll be any trouble in a few years. I might be able to go back. Who knows?
Uh,
But I haven't gone back yet. It's been a long time.
it's a strange experience when a city of your birth becomes a city of memory, and then a city of rediscovery when you go back again.
Yeah,
There, in his latest collection of stories, Ben Okri it does a
yeah,
beautiful job when he visits Istanbul, and it's the Istanbul of memory versus the Istanbul of reality and history. It's just
right.
it's he does it fascinatingly. Sorry, Marcello, I'm
No, I was just
Uh,
curious. When I've heard other Iranian-born writers and filmmakers and artists of all kinds who say similar things. Like I'm not sure if what I've just created is going to cause me trouble when if I ever go back. Like,
yeah.
how do you figure out if it will? You know, what who makes that this? How do you learn that?
Um, you don't really know. You're taking a
Yeah,
risk. I mean, there is a way to find out if your name is on a certain list, and there's a
really.
color coding. Yeah, there's a color coding if you're orange or red, or your name is on a certain list. But I don't think I don't think I'll know so much. You can call so and so, you can make some phone calls and find out through certain connections, but um, for the most part, you're taking a very calculated risk. You don't really
Yeah.
know. And you can go back. The problem isn't going back. The problem is leaving the country. It's about whether or not they decide to keep you in
Mhm.
and create a huff and a whole scene out of it, and create some excuse to keep you there. And that's always the scary part of
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
of
And you're a
going
citizen of
there.
Iran still, yes? You must. They
I
must consider.
am, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm a citizen. Yeah.
yeah,
Once you're born there, and if your father is Iranian and you're born there, you're always considered a citizen. Yeah.
yeah.
So, and they don't accept any other kind of citizenship, so they don't recognize my Canadian citizenship. So, I'm only Iranian in their eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a risk that I have to think about, and with my next book, I have to think about how that's going to be done, and all of that. Yeah, yeah. So we'll see.
Okay, wow. Well, thank you again for that response,
Thank
Naz.
you so much.
Unless you have anything else you want to add or so, I think we're pretty much at the end of
No,
it.
I'm good.
just
I'm good.
just
Thank you.
wanted to thank you, Peter and Marcello, and for the invite. And I'm sorry that there were so many technical issues. It's very unfortunate, but still, I appreciate you giving me the chance to share what I could. And Marcello, you were wonderful with your questions. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was such a pleasure reading the book and talking to you. Thank you so much.
And
You.
we will definitely, Marcello, I'm waiting to see your book, what's happening when
So am I.
please let it come out. I'm looking forward to that, and who knows, maybe we'll have you here as a guest. Uh, and when your book comes out, Naz, as well, maybe we can do a reprise and get you with the next book, get you here in person.
Yes,
So
thank you.
I'll be keeping an eye out
Thank
for
you so
both
much.
books. So, all right.
Thank you so much.
Peter, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
All right.
Thank you for joining us again. And Marcello, thank you for doing the interview. And Naz, it is such an interesting conversation. And I know that there are so many things that still needed to be said. And Naz, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we'll have an opportunity to have you both back here in person so we could show you around beautiful St. Albert and give our opportunity to our audiences to meet you in person. And please, all of you out there, thank you for sticking with us through all of these technical difficulties. Do please go out and buy Naz's book, this Aria, from our local independent bookstores. It is well worth the read. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. So thank you to our tech support team that has been fighting valiantly this whole evening. And do join us tomorrow night for Annabelle Lyon, if you are possible. We do look forward to having you back in our company again. Until next time, good night.